SpaceX is getting ready for an update on its Starship plans, NASA solidified plans to deorbit the International Space Station, and 2 members of the station's Expedition 66 crew recently passed 300 days in space. Those topics and more are coming up in this week's Human Spaceflight News Rundown. My name is Derek, and my channel, Orbital Velocity, is all about telling the story of human spaceflight and our journey toward becoming a multiplanetary species. Before we begin, I want to welcome all of my new subscribers and thank those for leaving comments and engaging in live streams. I sincerely appreciate it. Now, on to the news updates. Starting with the International Space Station, NASA recently announced plans to deorbit the 450 metric ton outpost by 2031. Now, we all know this day was coming at some point, but seeing an actual plan makes it feel all the more real. Today, the oldest parts of the space station are coming up on 24 years in orbit, with most parts of the complex more than a decade old. When the first modules were launched, it was anticipated the ISS would be in orbit until around 2016. That was eventually pushed to 2020, 2024, and now 2030. In order to ensure the space station remains safe over the rest of its lifetime, the ISS 5 partner space agencies are currently analyzing the outpost. The biggest limitation is the primary structure, such as the modules, radiators, and truss assembly. Nearly everything else can either be repaired or replaced. Currently, the program is examining the most recent technical issues on the Russian segment, such as an air leak on the Zvezda service module and cracks that were recently discovered on the Zarya module. Regardless, at some point the ISS will be too costly or dangerous to operate. In anticipation for that day, NASA expects to begin a gradual process of lowering the complex's average orbit over the course of 2 to 3 years. Currently, spacecraft such as Russia's Progress resupply spacecraft gradually reboost the ISS every few months to maintain an altitude of about 420-ish kilometers. However, beginning as early as the late 2020s, the complex will begin retrograde burns to gradually lower the average altitude to about 320 kilometers. The final phase would require 3 dedicated Progress spacecraft between June and November of 2030. NASA said Northrop Grumman's Cygnus spacecraft could also be used. These would be used to both lower the altitude of the outpost and line up its final orbit to re-enter the atmosphere in early 2031 over the South Pacific Ocean near a location called Point Nemo. This is the same location the Russian Mir space station re-entered Earth's atmosphere in March of 2001. It's a location of ocean that has virtually no sea traffic, which ensures any components of the ISS that survive re-entry don't pose any safety threat. In the meantime, over the next decade, NASA is looking to replace the capabilities of the ISS with 1 or more commercial space stations. For now, the ISS continues to be humanity's foothold in low Earth orbit, not only for cutting-edge research and the inspiration of the next generation of scientists and engineers, but also for use as a test bed of technologies as humankind begins moving out to the moon and beyond. One of the things the ISS is serving as for the next decade is a destination for commercial activity, such as all-private treks to the outpost. Starting as early as next month, the first all-private mission to the ISS using SpaceX's Crew Dragon spacecraft is expected to launch. On February 2nd, NASA and the other space station partner agencies approved plans for SpaceX and Axiom Space to send its first crewed flight to the orbiting outpost. Using Crew Dragon Endeavour, 1 private professional astronaut and 3 spaceflight participants are slated to fly to the ISS on a 10-day trip. Liftoff is scheduled for March 30th at Kennedy Space Center's Launch Complex 39A, with a docking at the outpost expected about a day later. Aboard will be Michael Lopez Alegria, a former NASA astronaut and now a professional astronaut for Axiom Space, Larry Connor, an American entrepreneur and nonprofit activist investor, Mark Pathy, a Canadian investor and philanthropist, and Eitan Stib, an Israeli investor and philanthropist. Stib will be the second Israeli to fly into space after Ilan Ramon, who died on February 1st, 2003 when Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart during re-entry just 16 minutes from landing. Together, the AX-1 crew plans to spend 8 days at the outpost to conduct science, educational outreach, and other activities before returning to Earth, splashing down in the waters off the coast of Florida. Many of their activities are still under review, but the crew has been training using NASA facilities since August 2021. This is the first of many planned Axiom Space missions using SpaceX's Crew Dragon. The company is also contracted by NASA to send 1 or more commercial modules to the ISS and is also contracted to build the first orbital movie studio, which would be added to the company's planned space station. In the meantime, 2 members of the space station's 7-person Expedition 66 crew have passed 300 continuous days in orbit. NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei and Russian cosmonaut Pyotr Dubrov have been in orbit since April 9, 2021, when they traveled to the ISS using Soyuz MS-18 alongside Russian cosmonaut Oleg Novitsky. Novitsky returned to Earth in Soyuz MS-18 in October 2021 with Russian film director Klim Shipenko and actress Yulia Persild. Those two launched to the space station in Soyuz MS-19 on October 5, 2021 with cosmonaut Anton Shkaplerov. Shkaplerov remained in space as a member of the space station's crew and will return to Earth with Dubrov and Vande Hei in Soyuz MS-19 on March 30, 2022. Dubrov and Vande Hei passed the 300-day mark on February 3rd. Vande Hei in particular is set to surpass NASA astronaut Christina Koch's 328-day continuous mission record on March 3rd, and Scott Kelly's 340-day record on March 15th. Scott Kelly currently holds the record for the longest single stay in space by any American astronaut. Vande Hei is expected to beat that by about 15 days. The record for the longest single stay in space for any person, however, goes to cosmonaut Valery Polyakov, who lived aboard the Mir space station for 437 days between 1994 and 1995. Last week, I talked about the Gaganyaan crewed spacecraft and its delayed schedule. This week, the Russian state space corporation Roscosmos gave an update on its plans to replace the storied Soyuz spacecraft. Called Orel, which means eagle, the replacement for the 55-year-old Soyuz design has been more than a decade in the making and has had several revisions. However, the most recent revision appears to be closer to the final form. With a projected mass of about 14,000 kilograms, with 18 cubic meters of volume, the spacecraft is expected to be able to fly 4 to 6 people into space. Launching atop an Angara rocket, Orel will initially be for low Earth orbit flights. The hope is for it to be used for future lunar missions as well. Currently, major testing is expected to begin in 2023, beginning with a pad abort test at Vostochny Cosmodrome in Russia's Far East. An in-flight abort test would occur sometime after that. Moreover, Roscosmos said 4 drop tests are planned for the spacecraft's landing system. Other than that, there has been no word on timelines for either uncrewed or crewed orbital flight tests. However, those aren't likely to happen before 2025. When they do occur, those flights are likely to visit the International Space Station. Moving on to the Artemis program, I touched on this topic briefly last week, so I'll be quick. On February 2nd, NASA announced the rollout of the first Space Launch System rocket to launch Complex 39B for a wet dress rehearsal pre-launch test has been delayed to no earlier than March. It was initially targeting February 15th for the rollout and late February for the wet dress rehearsal fueling test. NASA has cited additional time required to complete closeout activities at the vehicle assembly building, but teams aren't working any major issues. Lately, it seems like there's been a month-long delay for every month closer we get to the launch of Artemis 1. However, it was pointed out during a recent NASA press conference that nobody is going to remember you missed your launch date, but if you hold your launch date and you have an unsuccessful launch, nobody's ever going to forget that. So with a rollout in early to mid-March for the wet dress rehearsal, that pretty much means the earliest Artemis 1 could launch would be the April launch window, which runs from April 8th to April 23rd. The next window is from May 7th to May 21st. Finally, the last topic this week is actually over SpaceX's Starship. Late last week, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk announced that he was going to give an update on the whole system, which is now critical for NASA's Artemis 3 moon landing. This update, the first in about 2 years, is slated for 8 p.m. Central Standard Time February 8th or about 2 a.m. UTC February 9th in Starbase, Texas, at the southern tip of the state. In the lead up to this presentation, SpaceX has begun stacking the Super Heavy booster number 4 and Starship Ship 20 on the orbital launch mount. The launch tower recently saw the completion and activation of the rocket's catch arm, which is designed to eventually catch and mount both the booster and ship for rapid reuse. As of February 7th, only the Super Heavy booster has been stacked, but Ship 20 is expected to be attached before the presentation. Once completed, this will be the second time in history this rocket has been fully stacked at the site, the first being in August of 2021. NASA has contracted SpaceX to use the Starship and Super Heavy design to send a Starship-based lunar lander to the moon's orbit to wait for the Artemis 3 astronauts, who would then use it to travel to the moon's surface. I'll talk more about the update in next week's news rundown, but for now you can watch a recent video I did updating NASA's Artemis program plans here. There's also a link in the description below. And that's it for this week's news rundown, but before closing though, I want to show you the stunning images released by NASA showing divers in the agency's Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory testing out simulated low sun angles for future moonwalks at the lunar South Pole. When Artemis astronauts land on the surface as early as 2025, they may get similar views of long, dark shadows, so engineers need to evaluate how to do spacewalks under different lighting conditions where the sun is only a few degrees above the horizon. Astronauts themselves are expected to conduct low light tests using spacesuits at some point in the near future. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss another video. And while you're at it, be sure to launch that like button into orbit. The more engagement and shares, the more the algorithm will recommend these videos to others on the platform. It also lets me know what topics you're interested in regarding human space exploration. For now, if you want to learn more about NASA's Artemis program plans, in particular with the Lunar Starship, check out this video right here. And if you would like to watch last week's news rundown, click right here. Finally, if you'd like to take a couple extra steps to help support Orbital Velocity, there's a link to my Patreon page in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, Ad Astra.